Hi, everybody. Welcome to Connect My Brain. And I am your host, Dr. Laura Hansen. We are talking about attention. So, this is going to be the fourth podcast that I've actually done on this topic. And I think there's been some great information brought to your attention. For, that's a little play on words, isn't it? So, the first one was the history of what happened and how this particular diagnosis came into the arena and how it was called the hyperkinetic child. And then the interesting pieces of how it was brought into the arena of psychology and further labeled as literally a mental illness. And I do have a huge problem with that kind of thinking because we are not taking into consideration the developmental sequence that must occur in order for someone to pay attention. And there is absolutely a sequence of events. And there's lots of podcasts, not only these four that I've focused on the idea of attention, but really pinpointing some of those other parts of development like central pattern generators, which are reflexes that go on during the pregnancy period and are further extended during the delivery process and then continue primarily up until about 3 years. And all of those are about different rhythmic movement patterns that need to happen in order to wire up the brain. You come into this world, you are fully formed, but you are not fully functioning. As a little baby, you are not attending to anything. You are demanding somebody attend to you. And when you need attention, what do? You cry because you want somebody to come and take care of your needs. And over time, the little toddler begins to become more acclimated to their environment, and we begin to help them attend to themselves. You can pick up a toy, you can play with a toy, we can teach you how to potty train. All of these elements are part of wiring up the brain. You are first down in that brain stem. You are then going to go through growth and connection that is going to lead to the midbrain and ultimately up to the higher brain, which is your executive function. Over the years, I've heard all kinds of different courses for diagnoses. So the first one that I always heard was the sensory motor dysregulation. Then came in the clumsy child. Then came in executive function dysfunction. And then, of course, we have emotional dysregulation, anxiety, ODD, OCD. I mean, now it's just a vast of labels. How can so many kids have so many problems? Well, initially, we put into the idea that it's all about genes. And I highlighted a little bit about this in the last podcast, but bottom line is genes are not linear. That is why, if you have any type of brothers and sisters in your home or in your family, y'all don't look exactly alike. Everybody's got some different traits. There might be similarities, but you don't look exactly alike. And that is because genes are not linear, they are based on the expression of what's going on inside and outside of the body. And could we really have a gene that because of this gene, you can't pay attention? Well, they haven't been able to find that. Could there be similarities? Absolutely. But it can also be what shaped during the development of the subconscious mind. Children are little acorns. And from the very beginning, whatever's going on in a home life, what's gone on over the last 3 years and continuing, amount of stress and craziness that is going on is enough to dysregulate anybody. And how we're handling it, we don't have a point of reference for the last 3.5 years. How are we handling it? So, what's going to happen to our little acorns? They're like little ducklings following us for the first 7.5 to 8 years of their life. And whatever you're going through, I promise you, they are absolutely picking up on it. This too is going to influence how the brain wires. This is what the word neurogenesis means, the development of new neurons. Then we've got neuroplasticity, and it's because of what we've learned about neuroplasticity that what fires together wires together, that we can take that term neuroplasticity and use it in a therapeutic way, especially when we're wanting to try to change something. But neuroplasticity can be positive or negative. If I eat fast food all day long, I can assure you I will not have neuroplastic positive changes. But if I look at my chemistry and I feed my body what it needs, and I make sure that my supplements or the vitamins and minerals in my body are promoting balance, my gut is healthy, and I'm out there going towards new novel learning, I promise you, you're going to have positive neuroplastic changes. So this is where we have to do an inventory about who we are as parents. What happened prior to conceiving our babies? Where was our life? How healthy were we? How did we know we were healthy or unhealthy? Did we actually do any type of laboratory work to actually look at our nutritional levels? What was going on in our gut? Do we have any potential genetic issues that could potentially lead to causing some type of alteration in our neurocircuitry and what we might give to our offspring, our babies? We talked about in the last podcast that most of the research talks about a decrease in volume of mass in different areas of the brain. We talked about neurocircuitry kind of getting derailed, especially as it relates to the amygdala, which is this little part in our brain that literally is detecting, is there a potential threat? And then how that's going to influence other parts of our brain, like the insula and the frontal lobe, and how they're supposed to be communicating together. Whatever that environment was, whether we're talking about inside of the body or outside of the body, is going to influence how the communication is going to ultimately mature. And we all are very different. Each of us have a different approach. I actually have a document that talks about how do you think? And it literally is asking you to give a numeric value, 1, 2, or 3. And then you're going to total up in each of the categories. And one is kinesthetic, it has to do with movement. One is music. One is timing. And so you're literally grading yourself. And let me not use the word grade, because the minute you give somebody a document and what you're trying to do is tap in to how this individual thinks and perceives for themselves, the last thing you want to do is make them feel like that there's only a one right score. There isn't a right score. What you're looking to see is which of the categories have the highest value, and then put into chronological order from highest to lowest, this is the pattern in which you use to think. And I love to do this with families, especially with an older child, maybe above the age of 8.5, because I really want their interpretation of themselves. And then I'll actually give it to the parents, not only to do for themselves, but to go ahead and answer one for their child so we could see how close that comparison actually is. You know, a lot of times it is truly about the perception, how you got wired to perceive the way you do, but it's that perception that leads to sometimes emotional dysregulation, family discord, lots of different types of things that we just want to kind of put off to the side and give people a new perspective to say, now look at the differences. Now let's go to work, let's appreciate the differences, and then let's come back and see what kind of changes we make. And it really isn't important to change the order in which you think, but it's to address what is an alteration in neurocircuitry, what is an imbalance in chemistry, what is any type of gut dysbiosis deficiencies doing to the individual, and literally bring homeostasis back to the body. You know, I talk a lot about stress, and stress is an important thing to practice. You cannot have a stress-free life. You shouldn't, because you need to grow some muscles that help you handle different types of stressors. And ultimately, once we have a stress, what should come back to the body is homeostasis, balance. And balance can also be on the outside of the body as well as on the inside of the body. So balance in chemistry and balance in muscle tone, muscle strength, being able to actually take your body through balance. All of those are going to engage together. So today, what I want to focus on is motivation. Anybody that has ever brought their child to me where there is some type of an attention issue has always said, my child is just not motivated. And motivation, too, absolutely has a sequence of development, and we're going to talk about that as well. I love the information that I found today, or for this podcast today, and I want to share it with you. It's from some research from the Vanderbilt University. So what they found was go-getters who are willing to work hard for rewards had a higher release of a neurotransmitter that we've been talking about, dopamine, in the areas of the brain known to play an important role in reward and motivation. And these two areas are the striatum and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. The striatum was talked about in the initial attention podcast, and the medial prefrontal cortex was talked about in our last podcast. So the idea is to understand that there's certain areas of the brain that literally are going to generate through the delivery of a neurotransmitter known as dopamine that's going to encourage that when you do this and you get a positive reaction, you're going to continue to do it. Very interesting. I use that strategy on many of the cherubs that come here. And sometimes you see it work beautifully, that once we get the desired behavior going, it's very easy for that child to follow it. So it's the guiding, the directing, the encouraging, the restructuring. And then through the repetition and frequency, so how many times they come to see us, how intense we are with our program, the continuation of it with whatever has to be done at home. That's our intensity and frequency. And before you know it, I start hearing messages from the parent telling me, wow, he just goes and does his exercise. Am I supposed to get a ball for my child? They tell me that they have to do their exercises at home and we don't have a ball. So the child is encouraging the parent. That's a great outcome. But sometimes you don't see that same type of response. In Vanderbilt's research, they called them slackers. I'm not going to call them slackers, but that's what they called them. They are less willing to work for reward. But what they found, this is so interesting. Stay with me. What they found, they had a higher level of dopamine in other areas that played a role in emotion and risk perception. And this was in the anterior insula. We talked about the anterior insula in the last podcast. So go back and listen to that. But it had to do with the taste center and the autonomic nervous system. Interesting pieces, okay? The role of dopamine in the anterior insula came as a complete surprise to the researchers. The finding was unexpected, but it suggests that more dopamine in the insula is associated with having opposing effects in different parts of the brain, which complicates the picture regarding the use of psychotropic medications that affect dopamine levels for the treatment of attention deficit disorder, depression, and schizophrenia, because it calls into question the general assumption that these dopaminergic drugs have the same effect throughout the brain. Wow. I found this incredibly interesting. Okay, now stay with me. And in the last podcast, I was talking about what happened as a result of too much dopamine. And I'm going to highlight it again. It can lead to addiction problems. It can lead to aggressive behavior, uncooperative behavior, and less empathy for other people or situations. Taking more risks. Remember last one I talked about stealing. And acts of impulsivity, which is another very common word that is reported, as well as lack in motivation. Okay, so this is correlated to what they found in this research. The research is part of a larger project designed to search for objective measures for depression and other psychological disorders where motivation is reduced. And just remember, attention deficit has been now labeled a mental disorder. Right now, our diagnoses for these disorders is often fuzzy and based on subjective self-report of symptoms. Parent going in, my child can't pay attention. My child has lack of focus and concentration. Imagine how valuable it would be if we had an objective test that could tell whether a patient was suffering from a deficit or abnormality in an underlying neural system. With objective measures, we could treat the underlying conditions instead of symptoms. I got to tell you, when I read that, I was so excited to just Vanderbilt University is absolutely considered an Ivy League school, but to hear that the research was actually being done, number one, and number two, being reported, and number three, demonstrating what many people like myself find. And again, I say this every time because I never want to come across that I'm just sitting here bashing the medical side of healthcare, because I'm not. If you have an acute situation, you got to go to the ER. It's all there is to it. But when it comes to looking at function and looking at how something is working, especially in the pediatric population, because this is the population that I am incredibly fond of, and I have spent 28 years of my life working with, I can tell you that there's more to the story. It doesn't mean that the outcome of attention isn't real. But as he said so many times, these things are coming more as self reported and not from diagnostic criterion, because in that model, they don't have it. But at Connect My Brain, we absolutely have a progression that can match findings to what research has literally identified as far as brain waves, and as well as things going on with the gut and the choices of foods that people make. Spend a weekend just bombarding your body with complex carbs and see how you feel, especially if you don't do that. You could literally see that one for yourself. Okay, so let's remember that the primary target for ADHD medication is that prefrontal cortex. And it doesn't sit up here in the brain, in the front of the brain all by itself. Everything is connected. And we know that the prefrontal cortex is associated with attention, decision making, and individuals' expression of personality. Okay? Scientists have learned little about how ADHD drugs work, because past studies have primarily examined the effects of the medicine at high dosages. High dose stimulants can cause dramatic spikes in neurotransmitter levels in the brain, which can in turn impair attention and heighten the risk of developing addiction. Okay, so what is motivation? Motivation is an internal process. Now, you're probably an adult who I am talking to, right? I probably don't have kids sitting here listening to my podcast, which I think would be really wonderful if that happened. But let's just assume that this is an adult that's listening. Let's dive deep into that internal process. For example, myself, I love to teach. I love to teach people about their body. I love to teach people about their brain. I love to teach people about how their body works. I really have spent many years, even prior to being in healthcare, in the arena of physical body work and nutrition. I was actually a competitive bodybuilder for a very long time. I could actually give you a couple of pointers about me to connect dots about what we were talking about in the previous podcast to now. So, lots of emotional trauma growing up, and definitely an emotional eater, especially after the fourth grade, is when many things changed for me. And I then became a fat kid. And I was really harassed as a young person. The kids made fun of me because I was heavy. And when I finally got to college, is when I learned that if you do aerobic activity, you are going to elevate your heart rate and you can burn calories. Well, nobody had ever taught me this before. And I remember just taking off with this idea. And I literally just got so involved. I actually was running track. I wasn't on a team, but I would do cross country for myself. And I had actually gotten up to the point that I could run for 10 miles. And of course, I was becoming very slender and everything was wonderful. But I really distinctly remember how I had not learned this concept that if I did this with my body, things would change. Into my 20s is when I got into being a competitive bodybuilder. That was probably my most favorite time of my life. And I was a personal trainer. I was an aerobics instructor. And I learned so many things during that time. But in looking back in retrospect, it was those times of my life, high energy, high levels of exercise. I felt my best and it was driving me to do more. That's this idea of this internal process. And it really can look like that with any topic, but exercise really helps drive and pump that internal process. Okay. So going into practice now and watching what's been going on with kids, their endurance levels is it's so low. I often talk about the last 3 years and unfortunately kids being masked. And I checked oxygen levels every single time they were coming in, and literally they were deprived of oxygen, and it only takes 20 seconds for your brain to be deprived of oxygen to go into that fight or flight. So there's that fight or flight, the autonomic nervous system, the anterior insula, all those systems that we've been talking about for a variety of reasons. Okay, so exercise is a tool. Kids, what I've been noticing over the last really 3 or 4 years is their oxygen levels are very low, and they don't have endurance. You should be able to measure and get a preset of a pulse and an oxygen level. And then within 3 minutes, doing like a 3-minute step test, you're actually going to see heart rate go up and oxygen go up. Then you're going to do a 5-minute, and now you should see it neutralized. Oxygen should still stay up, but the heart rate should absolutely be within their target heart rate. These kids can't do it. So if I don't have the internal endurance, remember it's always inside and outside. If I don't have that internal endurance, how do I have internal motivation? You don't. You have to have goal-directed behaviors. We have to teach this early on, but I also would like to describe that it should be really age appropriate. I am a very motivated woman, but I can't come at the little cherubs that I serve with the maturity of who I am and expect them to have the same, because they're all still in the process of maturing. So everything needs to match. So when you're looking at your child and trying to direct motivation and goal directed behaviors, when the reward system is working, I am a huge advocate for allowances. When they're little and we're not really in that money phase yet, and it's a little toddler, you're really setting the stage. Remember, they're your acorn. They have to see you do it in order to follow you. So I love that song, clean up, everybody, everywhere, everybody does their share. Bringing rhythmic song, tempo to it's time to clean up, you're demonstrating. It goes all the way back to being a toddler, that you're going to literally be setting up your child's ability to then be able to do it for themselves. I can remember a situation where this mom, I think part of the issue is giving too much and literally having whole rooms in a house dedicated to nothing but toys. For little people, it's too much. And then because the desire of the parent is order and organization, which is a correct goal for their age, but it's not a correct goal for the child's age. And then hiring people to organize the playroom every so often. The child was completely plucked out of the situation. There's too much to manage. And because the desire of the parent led the path, the child was completely removed. The child never went through that process of the expectation that I should be cleaning up with my mom. I should be learning how to do this. And having the appropriate amount of things is always going to help that situation. As the child gets older, making their own bed, putting their clothes in the hamper, making sure that whatever they brought out of their room into the common area is put away, and then always start to add something that is part of the share of the household, all age appropriate. A 6-year-old can definitely go around and empty the trash cans in the bathroom and bring them all to the kitchen and open the big can and dump them in there. And maybe they earn $1. It's all appropriately done. But that's how you begin to teach this to your child. So wonder if you're sitting there and you go, I'm not there. I'm more in the forced, and it's not working out, and it's struggling, and it's hard. Well, my golden way is, first, as the parent, you have to decide, what environment do you want to create in your home? And it may take a little while, especially with adolescents and teens, because it's the age of the person and the number of repetitions that are needed in order to change the behavior. And I'm going to tell you, around 10 to 12, it's going to take you a good 6 to 8 months solid of staying on them to enforce the change with appropriate rewards. But when you get over the age of 14, it's thousands of repetitions, and it's hard. It's really hard to change. You can, but you got to be ready to roll up those sleeves and double down. I like to put together a parent and child contract. You have a family meeting. You draw a line in the sand and you say, from this day forward, but you got to mean it. From this day forward, we're going to do things differently, because this is wearing me out and I am no longer able to be the kind of parent that I want to be. I don't want to be yelling and screaming. I don't want to be in a fight with you. So we're just going to do things differently. It's going to take us a while, but I know if I am always the same to you, we will get there. And you lay it out. And maybe, in the beginning, it's just a few things to start with. And then you can come back to the table and you can add to it. But what I want to do is I want to ask you something. If this seems too hard, when is the magic moment for your child to begin to take responsibility of the appropriate level of their life? And I'm not kidding you. It's got to be age appropriate from the beginning. You can't take a 6-year-old and expect them to initiate all the things that you would like for them to initiate, even if you have tons of lists and charts. They haven't even finished developing their subconscious mind yet. What you're doing is you're actually creating rigidity, and that's the feedback message that's going into that child. And it could lead to a host of other situations. It must be age appropriate. But when would you expect the switch? if you haven't done this up until now? Do you think there's this magic moment that we have the diploma and we walk across the stage and we automatically step into our frontal lobe and start taking the responsibility of our life? No, it's a gradual progression. That's why I started. This has got to become an inventory. It's got to become an inventory of yourself and to think about what really went on in those early years. Where are you right now? What are you going to do to begin to change the trajectory, especially if we're talking about an adolescent or a teen, or even a young adult for that matter, who's still living with you? We've got to realize that we did influence the patterns that we are now dealing with. And sometimes it's going to be a lot tougher to turn them around. The reward pathway is there, but perhaps we've got to actually get in and begin to restructure those internal motives. If we've created the internal motive that somebody else is supposed to do this for you, if we have supported that everybody in the world is supposed to make an accommodation for you, what will happen to that person and their first job? You've been given the gift of a child. You have the job to raise them into the adult that will eventually come back and contribute to the world. We have innate drive and motivation, physiological ones, to eat, to thirst. But if we're going to take those physiological manifestations of behavior, hunger, thirst, feed me, clothe me, we have to combine it in order to create the drives that will later manifest into motivational properties. At Connect My Brain, what would we do in this situation? Again, we would do a stress test. We would do a brain map. We would do functional labs. We would be able to support you, especially if this is a teen or adolescent or even young adult, or maybe it's even you. We got to look at what is the state of the brain now. We can't just do this with medications. We're learning that there could be some very adverse reactions and long-term changes that could lead to even greater problems. So why don't we look at you today? Why don't we look at your child today and see where they are? Then we plot it out. No one here is ever treated like you're just going to become one on the conveyor belt. You are unique. Your child is uniquely designed. Families are unique. Needs are there that are different from one family to the next. Connect My Brain looks at that uniqueness. And our goal is to always meet you where you are and to help you get to the goals that you want to reach. It's important to take those steps. Depending upon when you're listening to this and where we are we in the summer? Are we in the academic year? So I'm thinking when this comes out, it's going to be pretty close to when kids are going back to school. The next cycle of events that's going to happen is the first couple of months your child is being analyzed, and you're going to go to a parent-teacher conference, and they're going to say your child has this, 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 and this. Before you jump to medication, call Connect My Brain, and let's take a look at your child. Now, I'm going to tell you, there are absolutely times that I will say to a parent, first, based on this particular lab test, we need to find a good functional MD. We need to go in this direction. And once that problem is solved, then we're going to go into a more holistic approach. I believe in using the appropriate services, and you will get that same type of consideration. Even if you're on medication, we want to meet you where you are. I'm not going to tell you to come off of medication. I will tell you that you may see changes, that whomever prescribed that medication for you, go back and tell them what you're doing, and they may want to make some adjustments. I believe in the team approach when it comes to serving patients. The patient is in the middle, their systems are in that periphery, and we become part of that support network. Give us a call, 678-501-5172, or go to the website and send us a question. Let me know when you're available, and I promise you we will reach back out. Please share this information, and thank you so much to the team of people, Marcy and Natasha, that helped me get this information out to the community and to the world. Share this podcast. Be blessed.